The wind howled across the plains like a wounded coyote, rattling the loose tin on the roof of Calder Nash's isolated log cabin. Perched at the edge of the Wyoming timberline, the ranch sat quiet and forgotten, much like the man who called it home. Calder, a broad-shouldered figure with a streak of gray in his unkempt hair and a permanent scowl etched into his brow, was used to solitude. He preferred the silence. After burying his wife and unborn son 7 years ago, he had no use for conversation or people. That night, the storm had rolled in fast. Thunder cracked in the distance and rain pattered on the windows, but Calder paid it no mind. He'd just finished oiling his Winchester and was settling down with a cup of bitter coffee when the sharp, unexpected sound of a knock broke the silence. He froze. No one ever came out this far. The road to his ranch had nearly vanished beneath wild grass and disuse. Most townsfolk didn't even know the place was still inhabited. His hand moved automatically to the rifle leaning near the door. The knock came again, lighter this time, almost hesitant. He opened the door slowly, barrel first, and what he saw stopped him cold. There, soaked to the bone and shivering like a leaf in a winter wind, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. Barefoot, hair matted with rain, dressed in a thin, torn dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her big brown eyes locked on his with a look he hadn't seen in years, desperate, scared, and trying not to cry. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask for food or shelter. Instead, she whispered something so soft he almost didn't catch. My mama's in the woods." Calder's mouth opened, but no sound came. The girl looked past him, into the cabin, as if trying to decide if he was someone she could trust. Her arms hugged a threadbare doll to her chest, the stitching unraveling at the seams. The rain dripped from her nose, her chin. He finally found his voice. "Where?" The girl slowly turned and pointed toward the thick, dark woods behind the house trees that hadn't been touched in decades. The kind old trapper said were cursed. Calder squinted into the tree line. Nothing moved but the branches in the wind. Nothing called. No voice, no echo, no shadow. He cursed under his breath. I didn't see nobody," he muttered, more to himself than her. "Ain't no towns for miles. No wagons came by today." "Who are you, girl?" The child only repeated, "My mama's in the woods." She was either lost, lying, or something far worse had happened. But Calder knew one thing for certain. Whatever drove a little girl barefoot through a storm to knock on the door of a stranger meant something was very wrong. With a grunt, he stepped aside and waved her in. "Sit by the stove. You're soaked." She didn't hesitate this time. She walked in silently, setting her doll down beside the warm iron stove, then wrapped herself in the old wool blanket he handed her. Calder glanced back toward the woods. He grabbed his rifle and lit a lantern. The storm was still blowing hard, and the forest would be wet, thick, and dangerous. But something about the girl's eyes tugged at something. Deep in him, something he'd buried long ago with his wife and child. He turned to the girl, his voice low and calm. "You got a name?" She nodded. "Elia." "Elia, I need you to stay here. Don't move from that spot, no matter what." She looked up at him and whispered, "You'll find her?" Calder paused at the door. The last time he tried to save someone, he'd failed. But something about this child had awakened. A sense of duty in him he thought was long dead. "I'll try." He stepped out into the storm, the door slamming shut behind him. With his lantern in one hand and rifle in the other, he disappeared into the woods, unaware that what he was about to find would not only change the child's life, but his own. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it fell harder now, hammering the treetops like 1,000 little war drums. Calder Nash moved carefully, his boots sinking into the soaked earth with every step. The lantern in his hand swung with the rhythm of his movement, casting long, flickering shadows across the underbrush. The pine woods behind his ranch were thick and tangled, growing wild for decades. Most men in town whispered superstitions about these trees. Stories of things disappearing in the thickets, of outlaws hiding bodies and old blood staining the bark. Calder never paid attention to such talk. But now, with that child's voice still echoing in his head, "My mama's in the woods," he felt the weight of those stories pressing on his chest. He moved deeper. Every so often, he stopped and listened, ears tuned for a cry, a rustle, anything human. But the woods gave him nothing but wind and water and the occasional groan of old trees swaying. Then he saw it. Flash of color, bright red, snagged on a low pine branch. He moved in closer and held his lantern up. A torn piece of fabric, rough cotton, red plaid. It had been ripped, almost like someone had bolted through the woods and the tree had tried to hold them back. He crouched down. The ground was a muddy mess, but he could see indentations, a trail of footprints heading northeast. Small ones. Barefoot. Could have been the girl. Could have been the mother. Could have been someone chasing them. He followed Dot as he walked. His mind worked. Where had the girl come from? No nearby farms had children that young. No missing person reports had made it into town last time he'd bothered to ride in. And if someone had been living in these woods, why? 10 minutes later, he came upon another sign. Blood. Just a smear on a tree trunk. Dried and dark, but fresh. Enough the rain hadn't washed it away completely. Near the base of the tree, broken branches told of a body falling hard. Calder knelt, brushing aside pine needles. Another set of footprints. Bigger. Boots. A man. And the tracks were fresh. His instincts, honed from years of working cattle, hunting game, and surviving the land, told him what had happened. The mother had fled injured. A man had chased her. And if Elia had ended up alone, wet and afraid on his porch, he didn't want to finish the thought. Up ahead, something loomed out of the trees, a structure, low and broken. Calder stepped closer, brushing vines aside. It was an old trapper's cabin, long abandoned, its roof half collapsed. The door hung crooked, barely attached by one rusted hinge. A good storm might knock it flat. He raised his rifle and pushed the door open. Silence. Inside. The smell of mildew and old wood was nearly overpowering, but there were signs of recent use, fresh footprints in the dust. An extinguished fire pit in the stone hearth. A threadbare blanket crumpled in the corner, damp from the leak in the roof. And on a rotted wooden table sat something that stopped Calder cold. A small, water-damaged journal. He picked it up. The leather was warped and the pages curled from moisture. Flipping it open, he scanned the writing. It wasn't much. Just scattered thoughts, names, sketches. Then he turned to a page with a crude, childlike drawing done in charcoal. It showed a man with no face holding a gun. Trees around him, and what looked like tunnels, symbols, circles and X's. The handwriting beneath it was shaky but unmistakable. They are watching. They know the girl saw. Calder's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a lost woman and child. Something bigger was going on here. He heard a creak, spinning. Rifle raised, he aimed toward the sound. Nothing. Just a gust through the trees. Or so he hoped, but then another noise closer this time. A twig snapping, deliberate, heavy. He backed toward the wall of the cabin, every muscle in his body ready to spring. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to hide. They were circling. Watching. Calder slipped out the back of the cabin and ducked. Into the woods, lantern doused, rifle ready. Whoever was hunting in these woods thought they were alone. They were wrong. As Calder tracked the sound, one thought refused to leave his mind. If this was just the beginning, what hell had that little girl truly escaped from? Calder moved through the woods like a predator, every step measured, every breath quiet. Years of silence and loss had turned him into something half-wild, more beast than man when he needed to be. And tonight, he needed to be. The storm had calmed, but the forest still dripped and groaned under the weight of the rain. He'd circled wide after slipping out the back of the trapper's shack, trying to spot whoever had been tracking nearby. But the woods offered no clear view, just shifting shadows, whispering pines, and that deep-rooted feeling that eyes were on him. Eventually, when he was certain no one was following, he made his way back to the abandoned cabin. Inside, he inspected the small space again, this time with purpose. Someone had used it recently. Maybe the woman. Maybe the man chasing her. Or maybe both. His lantern flickered over the warped floorboards and up the peeling log walls. Then his eyes caught something strange near the far corner, behind a heap. Of fire-rotted timber was a piece of leather strapped to the wall. Calder brushed aside the pile and yanked the strap loose, revealing a narrow cubby built into the logs. Inside were three things: a rusted revolver, a can of dried beans, and a folded cloth pouch. He opened the pouch carefully. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some stained with blood, others torn and wrinkled, written in shaky handwriting. He pulled one free and scanned it by lantern light. "I was taken near Crow Ridge. There's a tunnel under the trading post. They move people at night. They watch the girl. They think she remembers. If someone finds this, tell Sheriff Holt it goes all the way up." Calder frowned. Crow Ridge was 30 miles south. A dead mining town turned outlaw haven after the war. And the mention of tunnels that matched the sketch in the journal. He read another letter, and then another, each one darker than the last. Names, places, mentions of wagons moving under cover of night, silent ranches where no one ever came out, and always the girl saw. Ilya, Calder muttered. The child hadn't wandered by accident. She had fled something terrible, something organized. Her mother must have been trying to get her out and had left behind a trail of warnings in case she didn't make it, and someone wanted to erase that trail. Suddenly, a sound snapped Calder out of his thoughts. Movement. Soft. Behind the cabin. He snuffed the lantern, moved to the door, and eased it open. A shadow dashed between trees. But it wasn't a man. It was the girl. Ilya? Calder whispered harshly. She stopped just 10 feet away, breathing hard, eyes wide and terrified. "I waited," she whispered. "But they came. To the cabin. I hid under the floor." Calder was at her side in 2 strides, kneeling. "Who?" "Who came?" She pointed back toward the woods. 2 men. One with a scar. "I heard them say she's close. I ran when they weren't looking." Calder's stomach turned. If they were this close, it meant they hadn't given up. They wanted the mother or the girl bad enough to brave these woods during a storm. "You're safe now," he told her, even though he wasn't sure that was true. "You did good." "I don't want my mama to die," she said, her voice cracking. He looked down at her, this tiny scrap of a human, standing barefoot in the soaked moss, holding her doll like a shield. "No one's dying tonight," he said. Then lifted her into his arms. He carried her back into the broken cabin and closed the door behind them. For now, the shack was the safest shelter they had. He pushed one of the old crates in front of the door and leaned the revolver he'd found next to his rifle. Then he made a bed in the corner with the driest scraps he could find and sat beside Ilya while she curled up in the blanket. She clutched her doll and stared at the ceiling. "They took my mama because she tried to tell," Ilya said softly. "But I remember things. I do." Calder looked down at her. "What kind of things?" "Tunnels. Faces. A man with a gold tooth. Mama said if she didn't make it, I should keep walking. So I did." He nodded slowly. This was no longer just a rescue. It was a manhunt. A cover-up. a chain of evil that stretched through the wild and rooted deep in the territory. And somehow, this little girl was the thread unraveling it all. And Calder Nash, once a broken man, once a loner with no reason left to fight, was now at the center of something that would force him to pick up the pieces of the man he used to be. Because whatever Elia had seen, someone would kill to keep it buried. Calder barely slept that night. He sat in the corner of the old trapper's cabin, rifle resting across his lap, the girl Elia curled in a makeshift nest of blankets beside the cold hearth. The storm had passed, but the forest was still slick and restless. Insects chirped, branches creaked, and somewhere far off, an owl hooted low and mournful. His ears were always working, trained to pick up danger in the wind. His mind, though his mind was elsewhere, there was no more doubt. This girl and her mother had escaped something foul. Traffickers, outlaws, maybe worse, organized, ruthless. And they wanted the girl back badly enough to send men into the woods after her. That meant they weren't far. And they wouldn't stop. By first light, Calder was outside, scanning the forest floor. The ground was still soft with last night's rain, which made tracking easier. He moved quietly, eyes on the soil, and sure enough there they were. 2 sets of boot prints, cutting fresh through the pine needles and wet brush. They circled the cabin and moved off to the south, away from town. And beside them, smaller prints. 1 pair. Barefoot, Elia's. She'd run for her life just ahead of those men, probably within shouting distance. Calder followed the tracks deeper, past thick underbrush and fallen logs. The men had been moving fast, probably assumed the girl would head straight for the nearest town or road. They'd veered off. Good. That meant they didn't know she'd found someone. They didn't know she'd led them straight to him. But that wouldn't last long. Then, suddenly, a sound, low. Pained. Calder ducked behind a tree, raising his rifle. A few yards away, lying against a boulder near the creek, was a man. Not one of the boot trackers. This one looked different. Skinny, wild-eyed, bleeding from the leg. His shirt was torn, and his face covered in grime and sweat twisted when he saw Calder approach. "Don't shoot," the man croaked. "They're gone. I ain't with them." Calder didn't lower the rifle. "Who are you?" "Name's Jonas. Jonas Cole. I was part of it, but I ran. Couldn't do it no more." "Part of what?" Jonas coughed, holding his side. "They move 'em through the hills. Women, kids. Some never make it to the end. They take 'em underground old mining tunnels connected from the ridge to the basin. Sheriff's in on it. And so's the trading post boss." "That little girl?" "She saw more than they wanted. They said her mama talked too much." Calder's stomach turned. This wasn't just a gang of outlaws. This was corruption rotting from the inside out. And now it had spilled onto his land. "Where's the mother?" Calder asked. Jonas shook his head. "Last I saw, she was running. Bleedin' bad. One of the men Chambers, big man, scar on his neck, he chased her. Said if she made it to town, the whole thing could fall apart." Calder took a deep breath, processing. "You gonna kill me?" Jonas asked. Calder stared at him a long moment. "No," he said finally. "You're gonna help me find her." Jonas's eyes widened. "You'll get me killed." "You're already bleeding, friend," Calder replied, crouching. "Only way you walk out of these woods is if you show me what you know." Jonas hesitated, then nodded. "There's a hollow tree. Big one. She hid things there. That was enough for now." Calder helped the man to his feet, half carrying him back toward the old trapper's cabin. Elia was awake when they returned, sitting quietly with her doll in her lap. When she saw Jonas, she shrank back into the corner. "It's okay," Calder said, keeping his voice calm. "He won't hurt you." Elia looked at Jonas and said something that made the man freeze. "You held the door when Mama ran." Jonas didn't deny it. I tried to help." But there were too many. Calder set his jaw. He didn't trust Jonas, but he'd seen that look before, the look of a man who'd done something terrible and was trying too late to crawl out of it. Night was coming again. Calder built a small fire in the hearth and placed Jonas by it. "Tomorrow," he said, "you show me that tree." Then he turned to Elia. "You remember anything else?" "Where your mama might go if she got away." Elia nodded slowly. "She said ... if it ever got bad, she'd find the place where the trees grow in a circle, with the black rocks in the middle. She said it was sacred." Calder blinked. He knew that place. He'd seen it once deep in the hills where no trail ran. Old native ground. Sacred to the Arapaho. No white man ever went there unless they were lost or desperate. Calder looked at the fire. Her mama might be alive. She might be hurt, but she wasn't far. And tomorrow they were going to find her before the men with blood on their hands did. The fire crackled low in the ruined hearth as dawn pushed gray light through the gaps in the cabin walls. Calder sat sharpening his knife, his Winchester resting against his leg. Jonas Cole snored raggedly on a pile of blankets near the coals, his wounded leg wrapped in torn fabric. The bleeding had slowed, but Calder knew he wouldn't last long without a doctor. That wasn't the priority, though, right now. Everything hinged on a little girl who sat silently at the edge of the room, braiding her doll's yarn hair with trembling fingers. "Elia," Calder said gently, "I need you to tell me what happened before you came here. Everything you remember." The girl didn't answer at first. Her eyes flicked to Jonas, then to the shadows in the cabin. Fear lingered in the corners of her mind like a storm waiting to break. "I can't," she said softly. "Mama said not to." "Your mama told you to be brave," Calder replied. "She didn't come this far for nothing. And you didn't run all that way just to stop now." Elia looked at him for a long moment. Then she set the doll down, wrapped her arms around her knees, and nodded. "They kept us in a cellar, under a house. It smelled like dirt and oil and ... and bad things. Mama and I got taken when we were trying to go back to Kansas. The wagon broke near Crow Ridge. A man said he'd help us, but he lied." Calder leaned forward slightly. "They took her away sometimes. Mama always came back crying. I didn't know why, but she said we were going to get out and that I had to remember the way they went, what they said, who they were." Elia paused, her eyes wide and watery. "There was a man with a gold tooth. He laughed a lot, even when people screamed. One of the others had a hat with a feather in it. And there was a sheriff's star, but not like the ones in town. It was smaller, older." Calder's hand tightened on the handle of his knife. Her words were like puzzle pieces clicking into place. A network of men using old mining tunnels and backwoods routes to move people, hiding their operation under lawman disguises and backdoor deals. "How'd you escape?" he asked. Elia swallowed. "One night Mama cut the lock. She said she had friends once in the mountains and that she'd find them. But we had to split up. She said they'd chase her if they saw us together. And the men? They were sleeping or drinking. One saw us, but Mama hit him with a shovel. I ran and ran. 4 hours, until I saw your house." Calder exhaled. Slowly. The child had gone through hell, walked barefoot through wild forest, soaked in rain, hunted by grown men, and still made it to his porch. That kind of courage didn't come from nowhere. It came from a mother who fought like hell and a child who inherited her fire. Just then, Jonas stirred. He groaned and sat up, coughing. "I told you," he said to Calder. "They'll kill her if they find her. The girl knows too much. Her mama had names, notes, things that could burn the whole ring to the ground. You were part of it." Calder said coldly, "I was a driver." "That's all," Jonas muttered. "Didn't know what I was getting into. And when I found out, I tried to leave. They shot me for it. Calder stood. "You're going to earn your way out of this." He turned to Elia and crouched beside her. "We're going to find your mama," he said. "I know where the place is where the trees grow in a circle." Elia looked up, hopeful for the first time in days. "You think she's there?" "If she made it, that's where she'd go. But we'll have to move quiet, fast, if those men get there first." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he began packing supplies, his rifle, his revolver, the map from the journal, the letters from the hidden pouch. Jonas, limping and sweating, forced himself upright, leaning on a stick Calder gave him. Before they left, Elia reached into her dress and pulled out something tied to a string around her neck, a small brass key. "What's that for?" Calder asked. She looked down at it. "Mama said it opens the box with the truth, the one hidden in the black rocks." Calder's heart skipped. There was more to this story than survival. There was evidence. Something Anna Elia's mother had, hidden just in case she never made it out. And now, with every step they took toward that secret place in the trees, Calder wasn't just carrying a rifle and a wounded man. He was carrying the future of a little girl. And the truth that could burn a criminal empire to ash. The trail narrowed as the three of them, Calder, Elia, and the wounded man Jonas, pressed deeper into the forest, moving toward the heart of a land untouched by law or kindness. It was a stretch of wilderness even seasoned hunters avoided. Too many whispered stories of disappearances, ghostly figures, and cursed paths. But Calder didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in evil, and evil, he knew, led just like any man. Elia walked close to him, her small hand occasionally brushing his side. She didn't speak, but her eyes scanned the woods constantly, alert for movement, ears twitching at every crack of a twig. Jonas limped behind them, pale and sweating, leaning heavily on a branch he used as a crutch. "You're sure this is the way?" Calder asked him without turning. Jonas nodded. If she was headed for the circle, she'd take this ridge down into the basin. There's a split near the rock wall that leads right to the clearing. They walked for hours, skirting old game, trails and collapsed mining paths, until the trees began to twist thicker, darker, their bark warped and broken in strange ways. The sun struggled to pierce the canopy overhead. Birds were gone. Even the wind held its breath. And then Calder saw it. Blood, spattered across the bark of a gnarled pine, the crimson still wet and glistening in places. Drops trailed downward onto the leaves below. "Stop," he ordered. He crouched and studied the scene. More blood further ahead on a fallen log. A piece of cloth snagged on a jagged branch, torn brown with a single floral stitch along the edge. Calder held it up. Elia gasped. "That's Mama's." Jonas looked uneasy. "If she's still alive, she's hurt bad." Calder nodded grimly. "She came this way, bleeding." He followed the trail slowly, careful not to overlook a thing. The blood drops grew smaller, lighter, until they disappeared altogether. Either she stopped the bleeding, he muttered, or she couldn't go any further. Elia pointed suddenly. There, up ahead, nestled in the roots of a wide oak, was a hollow space. Calder approached with his rifle raised. Inside, half covered by pine needles and leaves, was a tin box, about the size of a small Bible, dented and rusted but still intact. He looked at Elia. "The key." She handed it to him with trembling fingers. The key turned with a metallic click. The box creaked open. Inside were rolled documents, names, numbers, a small sketch of a tunnel layout, and most damning of all, a list of towns, dates, and what looked like sale records. Next to each entry was a single letter. Some read D, some read XCALDER. Stomach turned. He didn't need to ask what X meant. Elia looked at him. That's what Mama hid. That's what they were scared of. Jonas leaned in, reading one name. Aloud, Sheriff Abel Thomas, Bastion County. Calder froze. Abel Thomas had been in office for 15 years. Well respected. Clean. Or so it seemed. But here he was on the list, tied directly to the movement of people like cattle. This wasn't just a criminal operation. This was protected from the top down. Calder rolled the documents back up and shoved the box into his satchel. This gets to the press, to the right people. It burns everything they built. A sudden crack behind them snapped all three into motion. Elia behind me, Calder barked. A figure stepped from the trees. Not just any man, Chambers. The scarred thug Jonas had warned them about. Big, wide-shouldered, face like a bear's, with the long white scar that split his neck and chin like lightning. Well, hell, Chambers growled. I didn't expect to find the whole happy family here. He raised his rifle. Calder fired first. The shot went wide as Chambers ducked, returning fire. The bullet tore through Jonas's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Calder dragged Elia behind a fallen log and returned fire as Chambers ducked behind a tree. You've got no idea what you're messing with. Chambers shouted. You think you can stop this with a few names on paper? No, Calder yelled back. But I'll sure as hell stop you. He handed Elia a revolver. If anything happens to me, you run. Don't stop until you reach the trail fork, then go east. You hear me? Elia nodded, eyes wide but filled with something new. Fury. Calder popped up and fired again, grazing Chambers in the shoulder. The thug howled and stumbled back, but then disappeared into the trees. Silence. Calder didn't believe it for a second. We move, he said. Now. He slung Jonas's arm over his shoulder and pushed forward. Behind them, somewhere in the woods, Chambers was circling, wounded but still hunting. The trees were closing in. The circle, the place Aina had spoken of, couldn't be far now. And Calder knew, if they didn't reach her soon, there'd be more than blood on the trees. Calder's lungs burned as he pushed through the last stretch of brush, branches slashing across his arms and face. Jonas staggered beside him, one hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, the other gripping Calder's coat to stay upright. Elia was just behind them, pale but determined, her doll tied to her belt and the revolver Calder had given her still clutched in both hands. The trees began to thin, and then, just as the sun dipped past the ridgeline, they found it, a circular clearing of ancient trees, each towering and twisted, their roots knotted above the earth like the arms of sleeping giants. In the center of the circle sat a cluster of dark basalt stones, black as coal and smooth as glass. The old stories called this place sacred, a natural cathedral that even animals seemed to respect. It was utterly still, and then, Elia? The voice was hoarse, barely audible, but unmistakably female. Mama! Elia cried out, darting forward. From behind the black stones, a figure crawled out, bloodied, wild-eyed, her dress torn and smeared with mud and dried blood. Aina. She collapsed just as Elia reached her. Calder rushed over and caught her before she hit the ground. Aina's lips were cracked, her skin feverish, and her side was soaked in blood. But she was alive. Elia. Aina breathed, wrapping one weak arm around her daughter. You found help, Calder nodded. You made it farther than anyone thought possible. Aina's eyes flicked to him. Who are you? A man with a gun and a reason to use it. She gave a faint, breathless smile. Jonas collapsed a few feet away, panting. We got the box, the documents. Everything you hid. Aina turned sharply. Then they're coming. Calder nodded grimly. Chambers is already close. Aina struggled upright, gripping her daughter's hand. We have to burn the names into the light, or they'll hunt her down forever. Calder opened his satchel and pulled out the documents again. We will. But first we get out of these woods alive." A sound stopped them cold, a low rustle. Then another. Calder stood, rifle raised, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the tree line. Chambers wouldn't come charging in, not now. He'd seen the girl, the papers, the wounded man. He'd realized what Calder had. He wasn't just chasing down fugitives. He was trying to erase evidence. From the opposite end of the clearing, a voice rang out. "Well, well," Chambers drawled, stepping from the trees. Behind him were two more men, armed and cold-eyed. Quite the reunion. Calder stepped in front of Aina and Elia. Jonas reached weakly for a fallen branch, knowing he couldn't do much more than be a distraction. "You shoot," Calder said, "and the names go public. Sheriff Thomas, Bentwood, every bastard that paid for a child like livestock." Chambers smiled. "You think that matters? By the time you get out of these woods, no one will care. The girl dies here. The woman too? You? Maybe I'll hang you from a pine." He lifted his rifle, but Aina stood up first, bloodied, shaking, but standing. "You touch my daughter," she said, "and I swear to God, I'll put a hole in your soul you can't crawl out of." The moment was electric. Calder raised his weapon. Elia, surprisingly steady, aimed the revolver with both hands. Then came the first shot. Calder fired, striking the man on Chambers's left in the leg. The man screamed and dropped. Jonas, with surprising speed, swung his branch into the second thug's knees, toppling him. Chambers fired, grazing Calder's arm. Calder dropped to a knee and returned fire, this time striking Chambers in the shoulder. The big man stumbled back, growling in pain, and for a second, it looked like he might run. But Calder stepped forward. "No more running," he growled. "It ends now." Chambers raised his rifle for one final shot, but Elia beat him. To a dot-bang-dot, the revolver cracked like thunder in the clearing. The bullet struck Chambers square in the chest. He staggered, dropped his weapon, and fell to his knees. He looked at the girl, eyes wide with disbelief, then slumped forward, dead before he hit the ground. The clearing went quiet. Elia lowered the gun slowly, her face pale, tears running down her cheeks, but her hands never shook. Calder walked to her, gently taking the revolver. "You did what you had to," he said. She looked up at him. "I didn't want to, but he would have killed Mama." Calder nodded, proud and heartbroken all at once. Aina dropped to her knees beside her daughter, pulling her close. Jonas groaned behind them, pressing his shirt to his shoulder. Calder looked at the mess of blood, ash, and secrets all around them, and knew this was far from over. But the woman had been found. The girl had survived, and the truth, ugly, raw, and powerful, was no longer buried in the woods. Smoke. At first, Calder thought it was steam from the earth-rising mist from the damp ground in the wake of gunfire. But then the scent hit him, acrid, heavy, unmistakable. Fire. He turned toward the tree line. Beyond the circle of ancient trees, a glowing orange pulse flickered in the shadows. Jonas, slumped against a stone, blinked through a haze of blood and exhaustion. "They lit the woods," he croaked. "The others, if Chambers didn't get you, the fire would." Aina coughed, holding Elia tight. "They're burning the evidence, the box, the trail, all of it." Calder's mind raced. They'd killed Chambers and two of his men, but others were still out there, finishing the job the rifles couldn't. Erase everything. With flames. "We need to move. Now." Calder helped Aina to her feet. She was still weak from blood loss. Her movements sluggish, but her eyes were fierce. Elia was already grabbing the satchel with the documents. Jonas struggled to rise but collapsed again, shaking. "You can't carry us all," he said, bitterly. "You'll have to leave me." Calder looked at the wounded man, then back at the smoke now rolling like fog through the trees. The fire wasn't just a blaze, it was a wall, a line of destruction pushing them eastward, away from the road and away from safety. "I've carried cattle out of canyons with broke legs," Calder muttered, "and you weigh less than a stubborn steer." He pulled Jonas over his shoulder with a grunt. "Elia, you stay close," he said. "No matter what." She nodded. "I won't let go." They moved fast through the sacred clearing, down the ridge, following old runoff channels Calder remembered from his younger days. Trails no man used unless he'd hunted these woods before. Behind them, flames crackled louder. The smoke thickened. Ash began falling like dirty snow. At one point, Calder stumbled, Jonas nearly sliding from his grasp. Aina caught him by the belt, helping balance the load. The woman was running on nothing but willpower and a mother's fury now. Elia pressed, her dress over her mouth, coughing. "It's getting hard to breathe." Calder pointed to a stand of limestone up ahead. "There's a break in the trees past that rock. It leads to a ravine. We cross it, we beat the fire." They reached the edge just as flames lit the branches behind them, but the ravine was deeper than Calder remembered. Too wide to leap. Too far to carry Jonas across. He stared at the gap about 6 feet wide, with a dead log stretching halfway across. Like a broken bridge. Aina stepped forward. "We'll have to cross one at a time. I'll go first," Calder said. He set Jonas down and tested the log. It wobbled but held under his weight. He crossed in seconds, turned, and motioned for Elia, "Go slow, crawl." She obeyed, inching across the log on hands and knees, eyes locked on Calder's outstretched arms. The fire roared behind them. Sparks flew. Elia made it. Calder pulled her into his arms. Next came Aina. Her legs trembled with each step. Halfway across, the log cracked loudly. Faster. Calder yelled. She pushed forward just as the back half gave way. Calder lunged and caught her wrist, yanking her over to safety as the log plunged into the ravine below. Only Jonas remained. The smoke behind him was now a solid curtain of choking heat. Flames licked the edges of the ravine. "There's no bridge." He gasped. "I'll burn before I make it." Calder didn't hesitate. He pulled a coil of rope from his satchel, looped it around a tree, and tossed the end across. "Wrap it around your waist. We're hauling you." Jonas grabbed the rope, tied it, and scrambled to the edge. Calder and Aina dug in their heels and pulled, dragging him across the dirt and roots while sparks flew over his head like fireflies. He rolled over the edge, coughing violently but alive. Behind them, the forest collapsed into a roaring inferno. Calder didn't look back. They ran down the far slope, away from the smoke, toward the stream Calder remembered flowing near the base of Hollow Ridge. It would take them miles out of their way, but it would save them. And in Aina's arms, Elia whispered, through tears, "We made it, Mama." Calder looked up at the sky reddened by ash and firelight and knew they had survived something most never would. But the fight wasn't over. They still had to get those documents into the right hands. They still had to expose the names, and Calder had the sickening feeling that somewhere beyond the smoke, someone even more dangerous than Chambers was still waiting to silence them, because fire can destroy secrets, but it can also draw eyes. And now the whole region would know someone had survived the woods, and they were carrying the truth. The town of Bastion looked quiet from the ridge, too quiet. Calder crouched in the tree line, his rifle resting across his knee, eyes scanning the dusty streets below. He could see the sheriff's office, the trading post, the telegraph station, all still, all deceptively calm. Aina, wrapped in a borrowed coat, sat beside him, her face pale but sharper now, like a blade that had been dulled, then forged anew. Elia clung to her side, holding the leather satchel tight against her chest. The documents inside were damp, some of the edges burned, but the names were legible. The truth had survived the fire. Behind them, Jonas lay propped against a rock, groaning softly. He was alive, but barely. Calder doubted he could stand again, let alone fight. But the man had earned his shot at redemption. Calder turned to Aina. Once we get the records to the telegraph operator, we wire every newspaper in the territory. Then we ride. And the sheriff? She asked. Calder looked back toward the town. Sheriff Abel Thomas, a man who smiled for photos, shook hands with preachers, and sold women and children behind locked doors and quiet deals. He's not walking. Away from this, Calder said flatly. Aina's jaw tightened. I want to face him. Calder hesitated. You sure you're strong enough? She met his gaze. I'm not strong. I'm angry. Calder nodded. Good enough. They left Jonas behind with a canteen and a promise to return. Then Calder, Aina, and Elia moved down the slope and into town, cloaked in early morning mist. The streets were mostly empty only. A stable boy and two men sweeping ash off the saloon porch noticed them. No one looked twice, but inside the sheriff's office, the door was open, and the man himself sat behind his desk. Sipping coffee. Sheriff Thomas was younger than Calder remembered, barely 40, dressed sharp, with a waxed mustache and cold, confident eyes. He looked up as they entered. Well, well, he said, standing slowly. Look what the woods spit out. Calder raised his rifle. Don't. The sheriff smiled faintly. You bring the girl all this way? Thought you'd be smarter, Nash. You're done, Calder said. We have names, routes, records. You won't hang everyone who hears what's coming. Thomas's eyes flicked. To the satchel Elia carried. That's cute. You think paper matters more than bullets. Aina stepped forward. I remember you, she said. You were at the farmhouse. You told the others to make sure she don't get back to town. You put a price on my child. The sheriff didn't flinch. I don't remember you. You're just another mouth, a stray. Aina's voice broke, but her hands didn't shake. Then remember this. She pulled a small derringer from her coat and pointed it at his chest. Thomas looked down at the weapon, then up at Calder. She won't do it. You want to bet her life on that? Calder asked. For the first time, the sheriff's smirk faded. Footsteps pounded down the street. Outside, the town marshal and two deputies appeared, but froze when they saw Calder's rifle aimed at the sheriff. The marshal's hand hovered near his holster. We've got evidence, Calder called out. Try anything, and it hits the wire in 5 minutes. The telegraph office was just across the street. A boy stood at the window, eyes wide, watching it all. Sheriff Thomas exhaled slowly. You're bluffing. Aina opened the satchel, pulled out one of the documents, and threw it across the desk. That ledger's got your name. Your signature. The girl remembers the scar on your hand. Thomas glanced at the paper. His face changed. Just slightly, but enough. And in that flicker of truth, Calder saw what he needed. He nodded to Elia. Go. The girl bolted out the door toward the telegraph office. The sheriff lunged, but Aina fired. Bang. The bullet struck the sheriff's shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Deputies drew their guns, but Calder had already turned, rifle ready. No one moves, he barked. Across the street, the boy at the telegraph office flung open the door and pulled Elia inside. She handed him the document and the key. The operator blinked, then nodded, slamming the door shut behind him. Thomas slumped to the floor, cursing, blood staining his fine shirt. It's over, Calder said. Outside, church bells began to ring. Not for mass. For news. Within hours, papers across the territory would know the names, sheriffs, judges, ranchers, politicians who'd bought, sold, and murdered in silence. The ring was broken, but the cost had been carved deep in wounds. In blood, in memory. Aina looked down at Thomas. You don't deserve a trial, she whispered. But we're better than you." She turned and walked out with her daughter, and Calder followed out into the daylight. Weeks later, the wind smelled of sagebrush and soot. The fire had long since burned itself out, but the memory of it clung to the hills like smoke in old clothing. Trees were blackened, the ground scarred. But in the stillness, life was returning, tiny green shoots breaking through the ashes, birds singing again in the early dawn. Calder Nash stood on the porch of his ranch house, arms crossed, watching the sunrise creep over the hills. Inside, Ana was sleeping. Her wounds were healing slowly, her strength returning with each passing day. Elia was already up helping to feed the horses, brushing their manes like she'd done it her whole life. She'd hardly spoken about what happened in the woods since they'd returned, but she smiled more now. She ate. She slept through the night. She was a survivor just like her mother, just like him. Calder looked down the trail that led toward Bastion. He could still see, in his mind, the chaos of that day, the way the town had frozen when the names went public, the way the sheriff had been dragged from his cell that night by townsfolk who'd once trusted him. No trial, no mercy. They found his body hanging in front of the jail. The next morning, and that was only the beginning. Newspapers had picked up the story within days. Names from Colorado to Kansas had been printed in black ink, some powerful, some quiet. Some had vanished overnight. Others had been arrested. One prominent rancher had ridden his horse into a river and never come out. But none of it brought back the women who hadn't made it, the children who had vanished, the trails that led nowhere but bones in the dirt. Still, something had been done, and that mattered. He heard the soft tread of boots behind him. Ana stepped onto the porch, hair loose around her shoulders, her figure leaner but stronger than before. She sipped from a tin mug and followed his gaze. "Trouble?" she asked. "No, just remembering." She stood beside him for a while. Neither of them spoke. Finally, she said, "Elia wants to stay. She says the horses listen better than people." Calder smiled faintly. "They do, most days." Ana looked up at him. "We can go, if we're in the way. You're not." She studied him. "You don't say much, do you?" "Only when there's something worth saying." Ana sipped her coffee again. "Then say this. Why'd you help us? Why risk your life? You didn't even know us." Calder looked back out at the horizon. "Once, a long time ago, I had a daughter. Not much older than Elia. She got sick. Fever. Took her fast. After that, I stopped feeling much of anything." Ana was silent. She would have been about her age now, Calder said softly. "So when that girl knocked on my door in the middle of a storm, barefoot, scared, whispering about her mama, I guess I didn't think. I just moved." Ana reached out and took his hand. They stood like that for a long time. Later that day, Calder saddled 2 horses. Elia rode in front of Ana, laughing for the first time in weeks. They rode into the hills together, toward the stream where wildflowers grew beside the blackened earth. Calder didn't know what would come next. He didn't care about labels, family, home, future. He only knew that 2 broken souls had found their way into his life, and he wasn't letting them go. And as they rode beneath the clear sky, past the ruins of a forest that had once nearly swallowed them whole, one thing was certain. They had walked through fire and come out the other side. Together. Truth burned brighter than any fire.